In this video we are going to add our obstacles or flowers, so player needs to avoid those obstacles. Let's get started. First we are going to create a class that will represent our flower. So just create new Java class in package entity and call it flower. First we need some attributes. So our flower has a head and body, which is actually a stalk of that flower. So for head we need circle for collision detection, but for body we are going to use a rectangle. So let's add our attributes. First is private final circle, collision circle, and next is private final rectangle, collision rectangle. And we need X position, but also Y position, which will be always 0 in our case, since the flower is going from bottom up. So let's create just X, private float X, and then we need our constructor, public flower. In constructor we are going to initialize our collision rectangle and collision circle, but first we need some constants. So width and height of collision rectangle will be constant and collision radius will also be constant. Let's add those constants. Private static final float collision rectangle width will be 0.5. This is also in world units. Private static final float collision rectangle half width will be collision rectangle width divided by 2. And now we need circle radius and height of that rectangle. So first private static final float collision rect height will be 20. This is also in world units, and half width is also in world units. And the last is our collision circle radius. So private static final float collision circle radius is 1.5. This is also in world units. So now let's initialize those variables. First, collision circle will be new circle, but before we create circle, since it depends on height of our rectangle, we are going to create rectangle first, and let's add our private float Y. Collision rectangle is new rectangle at XY, which by default is initialized to 0, so these two X and Y are 0, and now we need width and height. So collision rectangle width and collision rectangle height. Now the circle needs to go on top of that rectangle, so we need to calculate X and Y. Since X and Y by default are 0, we are going to calculate it X plus collision rectangle half width and Y plus collision rectangle height. That is where our center of circle will be, and the last parameter is collision circle radius. Now we need to get those two variables, collision circle and rectangle, so we need to draw those two. But first we are going to need setter to set the X position of our flower. So public methods, public void set X float x, not y, x. This x is x. We are just initializing our x variable to x, to parameter, and now we need to update collision circle and collision rectangle. If you remember, in Skippy class we were just updating collision circle since we only have circle. So update collision circle and update collision rectangle. Now we need to create those two private methods. So private void update collision circle and private void update collision rectangle. In order to update rectangle, all we need to do is just call collision rectangle set x, because we are going to change only x value of our obstacle, and we will move obstacles. We won't move camera, because it's easier to move obstacles from right to left instead of moving camera from left to right. Now for update collision circle, we need to set x and y. So collision circle, not rectangle, collision circle, set x. This time we need to add some value to x, and that value is collision rectangle half width. So x plus collision rectangle half width, and collision circle set y, y plus collision rectangle height. In order to draw those two, we need to get both of them. So we need to get the collision circle and collision rectangle. So we can just type get collision circle and press enter. And after that, get collision rectangle and create our getters. Now in game screen, we are going to initialize one flower and draw just one flower to see that we actually have flower. On the top of the class, right after Skippy variable, let's create flower, private flower. In show, we are going to initialize that flower. Since by default it will be at 0, 0, we can just create new flower. So flower is new flower, and we are going to display it at 0, 0 coordinate just to see that the flower is actually there. Now in our render debug or draw debug, which is at the bottom, we need to draw our flower. So first we are drawing Skippy, and then we need to draw flower. So circle, flower collision circle is flower, get collision circle, and rectangle, flower collision rectangle is flower, get collision rectangle. With shape renderer, we are going to draw those two variables. So circle first and then rectangle. Renderer dot circle, flower collision circle dot x, flower collision circle dot y, and flower collision circle dot radius. After that, we just need to draw rectangle. Render rect, flower collision rectangle dot x, flower collision rectangle dot y, flower collision rectangle width, and flower collision rectangle height. Now we can run our game and see that we actually have flower in our game. Now you will notice that flower is a bit too big, which we are going to fix a bit later. But you can see that there is stalk of flower and there is circle that represents head of our flower. So let's fix our flower first. In flower, actually in game screen, where we are drawing the circle, we are going to add 30 segments. So it actually displays as circle, not some rectangular object. And in order to fix this big flower, instead of reducing values, we are going to make our world a bit bigger. So in game config, as you probably already know, this is configuration for our game. So we can change it however we want. Later you can adjust it to your own needs. So world width will be 30 and world height will be 40. Let's run our game and see that objects will be smaller and flower should be there. Now you can see how our bird or bee is a lot smaller and our flower is there. We have head of flower and stalk. In the next lecture we are going to start moving our obstacles and we will add more obstacles to our game.